There was a time before kings had crowns and nations had borders, a time when the world itself was still choosing its shape. The earth was vast, filled with endless plains, dark forests, and seas that seemed to whisper promises to the brave. It was in this wild, unclaimed world that men became warriors, and survival became an art painted in blood and fire. The tribes of the northern steppes lived by the hunt, following the herds across frozen lands. But when the winters grew longer and prey scarcer, hunger sharpened their instincts into something harder, something dangerous. They learned that if they could not hunt beasts, they could hunt men. They rode on horses like shadows over the snow, carrying the wind's cold fury into the camps of their enemies. What began as raids for food became wars for dominance. The strongest lived, and the weak vanished into the smoke of burning huts. Far to the south, desert wanderers marched under a blazing sun. They carried stories instead of steel, but the world forced their hands to change. When oases dried and trade routes fell to bandits, they forged swords from the metal of fallen stars and took what they needed. Each conquest was a prayer for tomorrow. They did not fight for glory, but because peace was a luxury no man could afford. Across the mountains, kingdoms were born from ashes. A chieftain named Iraq rose among the fractured clans. He united his people not with promises, but with fear. The world remembers the conquerors, he said, not the conquered. His army swept through the valleys like a storm of iron. Every fortress he captured was marked with the same symbol, a single burning torch, the sign of rebirth through destruction. Iraq's name became legend, but so did his curse. For every city he built, another turned to ruin behind him. And yet, not all warriors sought blood. Among the wanderers were poets and dreamers who walked the edge of civilization, recording the songs of fallen peoples. They believed that conquest was not the only way to survive, that memory itself could be a form of power. Their words carried the stories of empires that once seemed eternal, now dust beneath the feet of new conquerors. As centuries passed, the age of warriors and wanderers gave birth to nations, borders, and laws. But the old rhythm of survival never truly faded. It echoed in every march of soldiers, every banner raised in battle, every dream of empire. Humanity had learned its first and most enduring language, the language of conquest. Even now, when cities reach for the sky and the world calls itself civilized, the ghosts of that age whisper from the bones of forgotten battlefields. They remind us that beneath our peace lies the same ancient hunger to endure, to claim, to survive. For in the end, the world was never truly ruled by kings or gods, but by those who dared to wander into the unknown and conquer it. In the marble halls of the kingdom of Arathan, where gold shimmered like sunlight caught in stone, kings were made and unmade by whispers. Every throne, every crown, every jeweled sword gleamed with triumph. But beneath that shine lay the weight of centuries, soaked in the quiet suffering of those who bore the burden of power. King Alaric sat upon the golden throne, a relic forged from the plundered treasures of 100 conquered lands. Its arms were shaped like lions, its back carved with angels, but its seat was cold and its touch heavy. The people worshipped him as a symbol of strength, but within the royal chambers, he was just another heir to a curse older than the kingdom itself. Each ruler of Arathan was said to pay the silent price. It was not a curse of blood or madness, but of conscience, a creeping shadow that settled over their hearts as they ruled. Alaric had seen it in his father, whose eyes grew hollow long before death claimed him. He had heard it in his mother's voice, trembling as she recited prayers for souls lost to the throne's ambition. Now it was his turn. Every night, Alaric would rise from his bed, drawn to the Hall of Kings, where portraits of his ancestors stared down from the walls. They were painted in glory, golden armor, jeweled crowns, faces serene, but their eyes seemed to hold secrets that no artist could disguise. Sometimes, in the flicker of torchlight, he thought he saw their mouths move, whispering the same question he had come to fear. Was it worth it? His victories were many, rebellions crushed, borders expanded, the royal treasury overflowing, but his dreams were haunted. He saw fields burning, soldiers screaming, and the faces of those who had begged for mercy. In the name of peace, he had built an empire of graves. One night, unable to bear the silence, he summoned the old chronicler, a blind man who had served 3 kings before him. "Tell me," Alaric said, voice trembling, "what is the true cost of the golden throne?" The old man smiled sadly. "Majesty, the cost is not measured in gold or blood. It is measured in the souls of those who sit upon it. Every decision steals a fragment of the heart. Every triumph hides a wound. Power is a crown lined with thorns, and each generation bleeds the same." Alaric said nothing. The next morning, he ordered that the throne be covered with black cloth, and he ruled from a simple chair of oak. The court whispered of madness, the nobles called him weak, but for the first time in decades, the people saw a king who looked human. Years later, when Alaric died, the black cloth still shrouded the throne. His son, young and eager, lifted it away, marveling at the glittering gold beneath. The court cheered as he took his seat, and as the light caught the throne's surface, no one noticed the faint, dark stains along its edges, marks that no polishing could erase, the hidden scars of every king who had ever dared to rule.
Long before maps tamed the oceans and borders defined empires, the world was stitched together by the invisible threads of trade, routes that curved across deserts, mountains, and seas. Along these paths moved not just goods, but ideas, gods, and ghosts. The merchants who traveled them were known as the merchants of the wind, for they followed the breath of the world itself, unseen, unpredictable, and unstoppable. In the 9th century, the port city of Serapha rose from the edge of the Red Sea like a dream carved in salt and sunlight. Its docks were a chorus of voices, Persians bargaining with Africans, Chinese sailors unloading silks, and Arab traders chanting verses of faith before their ships sailed with the monsoon winds. Gold, ivory, and spices were the currency of the day, but the true treasures were the stories carried by every merchant who dared to cross the unknown. Among them was a man named Zahir ibn Kalim, a humble spice trader from Oman, whose ships bore the mark of a blue falcon. His caravan sailed with cinnamon and returned with pearls, but what made him legendary was not his wealth, it was the routes he discovered. Zahir followed the wind as if it spoke to him. He claimed it carried whispers from distant lands, guiding him to new ports, new peoples, and new beliefs. One journey took him farther than any map could promise, across the storm-ridden Indian Ocean toward the islands of the east. His men trembled as waves rose like mountains and lightning split the sky. In the heart of the storm, Zahir stood on deck, eyes closed, whispering a prayer. When dawn came, the winds shifted and the sea calmed. His ship found land, a chain of islands rich with cloves and nutmeg, guarded by warriors with blades of volcanic glass. Zahir traded not with gold, but with trust. He offered his word, his prayer, and his patience. And in return, he received spices worth more than silver, and an unspoken alliance between faiths. He built altars where the locals prayed to sea spirits beside his own men who faced Mecca at dawn. It was said that on those islands, for a brief moment in history, gods met without anger. But peace was as fragile as the sails that carried it. Rival empires soon learned of Zahir's routes. Portuguese and Venetian fleets began their bloody race to control the winds. Ports burned, temples fell, and the merchants became pawns in the games of kings. Zahir's last voyage ended not in glory, but in silence. His ship vanished into the fog of the Bay of Bengal, leaving behind only a single chest washed ashore. Inside were not jewels, but letters, records of prayers, maps marked with stars, and one line written in fading ink. The wind belongs to no kingdom, only to those who dare to follow it. Centuries later, sailors still speak of him. They say when the trade winds shift suddenly, carrying the scent of spice and salt, it is the breath of Zafir ibn Khalim, the first and last true merchant of the wind, reminding the world that faith and fear have always shared the same horizon.
In the age when kingdoms rose on the strength of swords and fell to the whisper of prophets, there existed a brotherhood that served neither crown nor creed. They were known simply as the keepers of the script, scholars who believed that knowledge itself was divine, that truth could outlive empires, and that wisdom was the only power worth guarding. Their home was hidden beneath the sands of Al-Mirath, an ancient city swallowed by the desert. To the outside world, it was a legend, a mirage whispered among travelers. But beneath the dunes, by torchlight, men and women of every faith and tongue gathered to preserve the world's forgotten words. Scrolls from Alexandria, tablets from Babylon, and the banned treatises of philosophers condemned by kings. The keepers wrote in a code of their own making, lines that curved like rivers, letters that mirrored the stars. To the untrained eye, the scripts looked like art. To those initiated, they revealed truths that could shake thrones. Among them was a young scribe named Lyran, once an apprentice to a royal historian, before being cast out for questioning a sacred text. Lyran's curiosity was both his gift and his curse. In the depths of the archive, he discovered a scroll sealed in black wax, unlike any other. Its title, The Word Before Words. The elders forbade him from reading it, warning that it contained knowledge the gods themselves had hidden from humankind. But Lyran could not resist. One night, as the wind howled across the desert above, he unsealed the scroll. The ink within shimmered faintly, as if alive. The words told of a forgotten age when knowledge was not written but spoken by divine beings, when names held the power to create and destroy. It spoke of how the first kings stole this gift, breaking the bond between heaven and earth, and how humanity's languages became fragmented echoes of that primal tongue. Lyran read until his eyes burned. The next morning, the elders found him trembling, his ink-stained hands clutching the scroll. "It's true," he whispered. "Every word we write is a shadow of something greater." From that day, strange things began to happen. The ink in their manuscripts faded overnight. Pages turned blank, as if the words had fled. Some scholars swore they heard whispers in forgotten tongues echoing through the vaults. Fearing discovery and divine wrath, the elders ordered all copies of The Word Before Words to be burned. But Lyran had already hidden one. When the Inquisition of the North came, burning libraries and executing those who defied the church, the keepers of the script vanished into legend. Yet stories persisted, of travelers finding fragments of their coded writings carved into stones, hidden inside cave walls, or beneath cathedral floors. Centuries later, an archaeologist in modern Cairo uncovered a shard of pottery etched with strange markings. When deciphered, the words read, "Knowledge is not forbidden, only feared." And somewhere, perhaps still beneath the shifting sands of Al-Mirath, the last secret script waits, its ink asleep, its truth untouched, and its power eternal.
The great walls of Tianhua stretched for 1,000 miles across the spine of the northern world, stone and mortar bound not only by strength, but by fear. They were the pride of an empire that once believed itself eternal. From their watchtowers, the sentinels of the emperor gazed upon lands they thought barbaric, believing the wall to be the boundary between order and chaos. But the truth was far more fragile. Decline had already seeped in, not from outside the walls, but from within. The first cracks were not in the stones, but in the hearts of men. Generations had lived and died building the wall. Farmers turned masons, prisoners turned soldiers. When it was finally completed, the people rejoiced, believing no enemy could breach it. The emperor declared that heaven itself favored Tianhua. Yet while the empire stood in golden splendor, its people starved. Fields withered under endless taxation, and the soldiers on the walls traded armor for bread. Captain Liang, a veteran who had served 30 years on the northern frontier, knew the truth better than any scholar in the capital. Every night he walked the battlements, his torchlight brushing over the stones like a priest blessing the dead. He had seen too much: the quiet disappearances of guards, the corruption of commanders, the endless decrees from the palace demanding honor while providing no food. One evening, as the wind howled over the mountains, Liang found a soldier carving strange symbols into the wall with his dagger. "What are you doing?" he demanded. The boy looked up, eyes hollow. "Marking where the cracks begin, sir." He dismissed him for insolence, but that night when he leaned against the stone, he felt it, an almost imperceptible tremor. The wall was shifting, slowly, silently, as if the land itself had grown tired of holding the empire's weight. In the capital, the emperor's court celebrated the festival of eternal peace. Dancers moved beneath lanterns shaped like dragons, poets sang of victory, and the royal astrologer proclaimed that the stars promised another 1,000 years of glory. None of them noticed the famine in the provinces or the plague spreading along the rivers. The walls still stood, so surely the empire must be safe. But walls can only defend against what lies outside. They cannot hold back rot from within. As the years passed, the border tribes, once cowed by the might of Tianhua, grew stronger. They no longer feared the empire's armies, for the soldiers who guarded the great walls now fought for scraps. When the first storm of arrows came over the mountains, the sentinels barely lifted their spears. Captain Liang stood upon the battlements one last time, watching the horizon burn. Behind him lay the bones of a dying empire. Before him, the rising smoke of a new world. He whispered, "It didn't fall today. It began long ago." When dawn came, the great walls still stood, proud and silent. But beneath their stones, the cracks widened, each one a shadow cast by the arrogance of those who believed stone could outlast time. And so the empire that built walls to keep the world out never realized the darkness had always been inside.